Hello everyone. We know there are hundreds, if not thousands of ways to earn money. But for an average citizen, did you know that there are only two ways to spend money? That's right. The only two ways to spend money are mandatory spending and discretionary spending, or essential spending and non-essential spending. Under essential spending, you can list housing, utilities like electricity, water, gas, phone and internet. Then comes food and groceries, healthcare and transportation. Under non-essential spending, we can list entertainment like going to restaurants, concerts, movies, Netflix subscriptions, holidays and vacations. Miscellaneous spending like luxury apparel and cosmetics, premium gym memberships, etc. Now, over the last few years, one important utility that has been getting more and more costly is this: phone and internet. And if you live in Canada or have friends living in Canada, you know that the telecom bills are ridiculously high.
This is insane because we're already paying for like way too much.
Any increases, right? There's enough expenses going on right now.
In fact, Canada has one of the highest telecom prices in the world. And it is not just an economic issue. In Canada, telecom is also a political issue.
Need more competition in our telecom sector.
Liberals love to suck up to big oligopolistic corporations that raise prices.
Canadians have told us one thing: they want lower prices.
So today we deep dive into the Canadian telecom industry and really understand, why are the telecom prices so high in Canada? Is the Canadian government taking any steps to curb the high telecom prices? And most importantly, what can Canadian government learn from other countries about managing their telecom crises better? Friends, do you know what an oligopoly is? Oligopoly is a state of limited competition in which there are only a few producers or sellers in the market. For example, if Sam decides to purchase a car, but when he goes to buy a car, the only cars available in the market are Mercedes-Benz, BMW and Porsche. So even though Sam wants to buy a car, he has to either spend more money or pay a fixed premium every month in installments. What's even worse, if tomorrow a smaller car company, say Hyundai or Toyota, wants to sell affordable cars in the market, these companies as well as the government makes it impossible for smaller car companies to sell affordable cars to the consumers. Therefore, Sam is forced to buy a car only from these three companies. That is how oligopoly works. Now, if you understand oligopoly better, let us see what's happening in Canada. The Canadian telecom market is dominated by three companies: Bell, Rogers and Telus. These companies control the vast majority of our network infrastructure, meaning they set the rules, we pay the price. And while some people might argue that there are smaller mobile network operators like Virgin Mobile, Fido and Kudo that provide slightly cheaper plans, the fact of the matter is these companies are also owned by the same three companies. So actually, there is no competition in the Canadian telecom market. It is just an illusion of competition. And there is nothing you or I can do about it. Well, then you would ask, isn't the government doing anything about it? I mean, it is their responsibility to ensure that the sky-high prices of phone and internet are regulated in the country, right? Well, they have done a few things. Let's understand the steps taken by the Canadian government and their results. The first thing done by the government body Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or CRTC, is encouraging competition through MVNOs. But what is this MVNO and why is the government supporting it in the first place? Let me explain it with some visuals. Friends, there are two types of network operators: mobile network operators and mobile virtual network operators. Now, mobile network operators like Bell, Rogers and Telus own and operate everything, right from the network towers and the wireless internet lines, engineers constructing the network towers and the wireless internet lines, the interconnect which makes customers of Bell communicate with customers from Rogers or Telus, the core network, which in simple terms is the central element of network that provides telecom services from these network towers to the customers. Then there is the IT system and applications. Then come the engineers, developers, marketing team, finance team. In short, all the employees. Then there are these call centers to resolve customer issues. And finally, there are retail outlets and kiosks in a mall to sell as much phone and internet services as possible. Now, this entire infrastructure and its operations is owned and operated by mobile network operators. Bell, Rogers and Telus are MNOs with their own separate infrastructure and operations. On the other hand, mobile virtual network operators own and operate basically just themselves. Now, MVNOs are just a retail services brand that has their employees, which include the marketing team, the finance team, and other support staff, their own call centers, and their dedicated retail outlets and mall kiosks. But that's it. So, the primary difference between MNOs and MVNOs is that MNOs are infrastructure plus retail services, while MVNOs are just retail services. MVNOs do not own any infrastructure and are completely reliant on MNOs to share their infrastructure in order to function at all. Now, if this is very clear to you, let us understand why the Canadian government is trying to support these MVNOs. Now, in this 2021 telecom regulatory policy, the government provided their support to MVNOs to mainly tackle the issue of competition in the retail mobile wireless services market. Now, according to CRTC, this new regulation will support the deployment of more mobile virtual network operators in the country. That's a good thing, you would ask. A step in the right direction, right? But there were two main issues with this policy. First, temporary access with a phase out. The MVNOs were given access to existing wireless networks, but only for a limited period of 7 years. If we read this document further, it states that while eligible regional wireless carriers use the network of Bell Mobility, Rogers and Telus, they will serve new areas while they build their own networks. This means that these MVNO companies have to eventually build their own network tower and their own wireless network lines. Now, I know this is not a geography case study, but Canada is the second largest country by square kilometers in the world. So creating your own infrastructure from scratch is very tough for any company. The second issue was leasing access favored the telecom giants. Now, instead of CRTC setting the wholesale prices, the big telecom companies were allowed to negotiate rates of leasing their infrastructure to these smaller MVNOs. This obviously resulted in higher leasing fees for the infrastructure charged by the big three telecom companies, which limits the ability of MVNOs to offer competitively low prices to the customers. So a temporary access with higher fees was a win-win for the big three and lose-lose for the smaller telecom companies, Canadian government, and most importantly, the consumers. So now you have understood why the telecom prices are so high in Canada and the Canadian government's weak efforts to curb the high telecom prices. But on the other hand, some countries took drastic steps to ensure that the telecom market is not monopolized and the customers do not pay a high price for it. So let's understand what strategies can Canadian government learn from these countries about managing their telecom crisis better. The first strategy is structural separation. Now let me explain how structural separation works from a previous example so you can understand it very easily. In structural separation, the government separates the infrastructure into one company and retail services into another company. So in our example, CRTC can order the telecom company Bell to split into two completely different entities, say Bell Networks and Bell Mobility. Now Bell Networks can lease its network towers and wireless services to all the MVNOs, and Bell Mobility is just an MVNO and one of the benefactors, just like Virgin Mobile, to lease the infrastructure from Bell Network. No special treatment. So you see, if all the big three telecom companies are structurally separated into telecom infrastructure companies and telecom retail services, it would be an even ground for competition for the infrastructure as well as for the MVNOs. And this idea of structural separation is not mythological. In New Zealand, the government forced structural separation of Telecom New Zealand and it was split into two companies, Chorus for network infrastructure and Spark for retail services. This ensured that all service providers had equal access to the network, driving competition and lowering prices. So a structural separation of these companies into infrastructure and retail services can definitely boost competition in the Canadian telecom market. Second, we need stronger MVNO leasing policies. Now, while Canada tried to increase competition, they failed to make a difference because the high leasing prices of infrastructure made it impossible for smaller telecom companies to offer quality services to the customers at discounted prices. Now, if Canada truly wants to support the smaller telecom companies, they need to mediate the leasing prices of infrastructure and ensure that these companies do not overcharge the smaller telecom companies. Third, Canada could consider a government-led project to create their own infrastructure. This would allow the government to take control of infrastructure and lease it to private companies at fair rates, which will lead to increase in competition and improve network in rural areas. This strategy was adopted by Australia as National Broadband Network or NBN back in 2011. But for Australia, a mismanaged approach political influences, and multiple delays increase the timeline of the implementation. However, it is an extremely lucrative strategy if Canadian government has the budget for such infrastructure. In summary, the high telecom prices in Canada stem from a lack of true competition, driven by oligopolistic practices and ineffective government policies. Now, by learning from such successful models in other countries, Canada could implement strategies to improve competition and lower prices, benefiting all consumers. As someone who has lived in Canada for almost 2 years now, I can assure you that it's a beautiful country in every aspect. And if together we highlight such issues and find solutions, we can also ensure a beautiful and prosperous future for every individual of this country. That's all from my side, friends. I hope you liked today's case study, because single-handedly creating such long pieces of content is not easy. So if you find this video helpful, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share the video with your friends and let me know what other topics would you like me to cover. Till then, for awesome business content, keep watching The Better Company.